What's up, guys? I'm James Bainey, and I'm here to talk about The Bad Batch, yet again, Season 3, Episode 14. This one's called Flash Strike. You know, in a way, after that episode where Crosshair fires that little tracking beacon and it doesn't fail, and we're like, okay, now what? And it sort of resets the Bad Batch trying to get to Tantis. This sort of felt like, we had last week's episode, part 1, and this sort of felt like part 2 of that leading up to the finale. So in a way, I sort of see this as the second half of last week's episode, and that is sort of like a little sub-Rampart act, if you will. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. This is sort of picking up. They all pick up where the last one left off, but this one does sort of, they're in hyperspace. They pick up right where we left off. And as expected, as soon as we get out of that, almost immediately we go into the dogfight, which results in the ship being shot down and a big crash landing. When planes crash, everybody lives, right? Time and time again. A way to just get away from a bad situation is to just crash land wherever you need to be and then just have like 10 or 20 minutes before everybody shows up that you can formulate a new plan to get where you need to go. Crash landing, very dangerous, not in the Bad Batch, happens all the time. Contrary to that, you have Echo, who's on the ship, and, you know, Hunter's saying, like, he's going to be able to find his way off, and they show that, you know, he's very good at sneaking around. We talked about that last week, and he takes on the Stormtrooper outfit and the persona as he's moving around, and I think one of my favorite lines out of this was Echo saying, thanks for the hand, after he is able to get it from the droid. But actually, I'm skipping ahead a little bit too far because I want to go back to Omega. When they are in the vault and they start hearing all the booming and crashing above, they're like, oh, there's a laser cannons. There must be a battle going outside. And I think she starts thinking, this might be the best opportunity I have to sort of sneak out of here and figure out what's going on. And you know what? It's funny. I've been watching this whole season, and this is the first time it dawned on me that these 4 kids, there's something to them that might be special. And we may see these kids again, or at least 1 or 2 of them or something. I just thought it was kind of interesting. It was the first time that it dawned on me that it was like, oh, I wonder if we'll ever see these people fight the rebellion, because they've seen the worst of the Empire and they may have special abilities that could help. I mean, that's kind of a side thing, but the point that I think that we need to talk about is that this is the moment when Omega decides that she's going to sneak away, and she just asks the kids to kind of cover for her or whatever, but she's sneaking away and we're seeing what the insides of what she's been looking at finally looks like. The Bad Batch all gather in the forest and they start moving towards the base, and there's this interesting conversation that happens between Rampart and Crosshair, and you know, the way that it ends, you know, because Rampart's saying, you're only out for your own interests. I know you. And Crosshair's like, I've changed. And Rampart kind of doesn't believe him. That was the moment when I thought, oh, this is the big, like, Crosshair moment that's going to happen. He's going to have this opportunity to do something for himself or whatever. And somehow that's going to, and Rampart's going to try to push against that, and it's going to cause Rampart to be killed. So he thinks he knows Crosshair. He doesn't actually know Crosshair at all, and it gets him killed, and that's how we deal with that character. Well, I'll get to it, but I was wrong. What actually does end up happening is they are headed towards the base, and Rampart, being annoying, happens to wake up this big giant creature, which, again, strike 2 for the Bad Batch, things that happen all the time. They have to fight this big crazy monster, and as it so happens, the group gets separated, and Rampart just ends up apparently being captured by the Empire, and I guess they're going to send him back to the camp he was in. I don't know, but that is a way to sort of avoid having to kill off a character, even though he probably deserves it. We were okay with him just being sent away and punished. So resend that character back to his punishment. That's probably the best way to get rid of him. I'm assuming he's gone for the rest of this episode we know, but the finale as well. cut back to Echo, who now actually gets caught, which is interesting, but the person who catches him is Emeree. And they have this conversation about how they are aware of each other and that Omega is sort of this person that's bridging the two of them. Echo doesn't like Emeree because of what he's heard about her, but Omega vouches for her and says, you know, there's something to this person. I think we can trust her. I think, you know, and she proves that immediately, that says, I'm going to help you get inside the vault. And so it all works out. But I do like that angle that Echo was sort of like, I don't like you. I know about you. I've heard about you. I don't like you. And I think that really worked. And it gives Emeree the opportunity to say, let me prove it. Let me show you that I've changed. I was doing that stuff, but I didn't really know what I was doing, and I wasn't really thinking like that before, and Omega's changed my mind. And I think that conversation was really good. The whole clone dynamic is so cool sometimes. Like even in that conversation, it seems contradictory for Echo to say, you're a clone and I don't like you and I would kill you if I had the chance. But at the same time, it's in defense of clones that clones should never hurt each other and they should always get along. So the dynamic there is really interesting, but totally believable and not really contradictory at all. It sort of treats them like their own species, which is kind of really dynamic and interesting, like I said. The last thing about this episode is probably one of the most interesting aspects and clues that we have going into that final episode of the series. And that is that Omega's walking around and she comes across the Zillow beast, which my first initial thought was, oh my God, they're finally bringing it back from the Clone Wars. And then I did a little bit of research looking into it and realized or remembered the Zillow beast was in the Bad Batch. Bad Batch Season 2 had an episode where it was sort of like Alien, which Bad Batch does a lot of that too. Sort of like the original Alien movie, and they're on this like abandoned ship and everybody was killed or whatever, and they come across a baby Zillow beast who eventually outsmarts them, gets away, and is eating all of this electricity, which causes it to become a big Zillow beast. Bad Batch, they were looking it over and they're like, oh my gosh, what was that thing? Oh, it was a Zillow beast. And they were able to get into like, well, the Emperor, before he was the Emperor, he was the one who sort of like had it protected and all this stuff. Well, what were they doing with it? Well, it could be weaponized and all this stuff. There was this other episode of the Bad Batch. So not only is this sort of like referential to the Clone Wars and possibly ending that arc of like the Emperor taking the Zillow beast to hide it away to use it one day as a weapon. But now we're also referencing our own earlier arc in the Bad Batch where they discovered this Zillow beast and that had escaped and they grew to a big one and now it's been put away and now they're going to bring that back. And I'm so excited for next week to see how everything's going to wrap up, because as we're getting closer and closer and closer, it feels like they're going to wrap up this little bit and they're not going to tell like a bigger, wider story, which is totally fine. But I think a lot of people have kind of felt like there was this whole like clone revolution thing happening. And I think if that does happen, it's going to be on a smaller basis of just on Tantis or something along those lines, where you're going to have the clones and all these prisoners and everybody kind of stand up to the bad people in Tantis, and there'll be like a battle or something, but Zillow Beast being the thing that like breaks everything open and starts the riots, if you will. I don't know, man. It's crazy. We'll see where it goes. I'm excited about next week. That being said, right on the precipice of the series finale, I want to say one thing about the show in general is that to me, now looking back at all of it, I'm looking at who has had the biggest arcs. And I think this show, right from the get-go, was sort of advertised as the Bad Batch. Those four characters are the protagonists of this show. And what happens when the protagonists meet like their second protagonist, Omega, and how she's thrusted into it, and how are these two going to work together? So sort of like the Odd Couple. You have these group of people, which are one entity, and then you have Omega. As the show has progressed, I've sort of realized that the Bad Batch group, as it is, almost feels like a secondary character and not actually a protagonist. Omega, absolutely the protagonist, has gone from A to Z over the course of the 3 seasons, right? We've seen that character grow, and there's still growth there, but from where she began to where she is now, that is sort of the point of watching The Bad Batch. But there is one other character, and that is surprisingly, and I didn't expect this, obviously, when the show first started, but even in first season, second season, we're like, oh man, that character is obviously important, and we're talking about his story, but I didn't realize that it sort of is the point of The Bad Batch, and that's Crosshair. And I know you probably saw that coming, but the thing is that from where he started to where he ends, it's the biggest, craziest arc in the show. It's almost like the show could have been called Crosshair. Just watching him get from point A to point B to point C, and now all the way to the same place Omega is just absolutely incredible. From never trusting her, can't believing that we would disobey orders for a kid, going against the rest of the Bad Batch to be like, you guys are idiots. This dynamic does not work, and we have to do this to finally end up in season 3, where it almost feels like the only motivation he has anymore is to follow Omega and do what he needs to do in support of Omega. It's absolutely wild, and I think that is going to be the legacy of the show, is not so much like Hunter's arc or how far Wrecker has come or the team dynamic working sometimes and not working. I mean, we're going to remember that Tech died along the way. That was a big portion of the show. But the crazy thing to me is that dynamic between watching Omega turn into who she becomes and then watching Crosshair abandon who he thought he was and then turn into somebody different, and then yet again turning into a third version of himself that is so drastically different from either version that he's ever been, and yet him fully being justified in the fact that that's the best version of himself. I expect that to be, hit on the head right there at the end of the show. I expect that in the finale. We will see, but that has sort of been my takeaway from 3 seasons of The Bad Batch, is that this show is basically the Crosshair show, with Omega being the other protagonist that is helping him through that journey and also learning so much about the world herself. But that is it for my final predictions before we get that series finale. Guys, that's episode 14 of the Bad Batch reaction show. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. The Resistance broadcast is now once a week with John and Lacey. They're doing 1 episode a week of Star Wars, and they're going to be doing their new podcast on Mondays called Nerdy and Nice. So you guys got to check that out. As for the Bad Batch, that's it for this week. Can't wait for the series finale. I'm sure you guys are feeling the same. But until then, we'll see you later.